They think they can take what's mine and get away with it, I muttered under my breath as the smell of freshly poured concrete hit my nose before I even stepped onto the hill. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10, enjoy the story. My name is Ethan Carter, 36 years old, third-generation landowner, and this 50-acre stretch of rolling Texas hill country has been in my family since my grandfather bought it back in 1952. The morning sun gleamed off the metal beams of the machinery as a fleet of cement trucks lined up like soldiers, wheels crunching over the gravel road that led to my back 40. The air was thick with dust, and I could taste it on my tongue, a mixture of dry earth and the sharp tang of asphalt. Maggie, the 52-year-old HOA president of Willowbrook Estates, stood atop her little observation platform, white blouse crisp, hair pulled back, hands perched on her hips as she surveyed the 42 new homes sprouting across the meadow that was supposed to be my pasture. She smiled, that particular smile that Americans learn to recognize in suburban politics, sweet, polished, and deadly calculated, the type that makes you immediately doubt yourself before realizing it's all about control. I clenched my fists as I watched a bulldozer push through the remnants of the old fence I had built with my father decades ago, the crunch of wood snapping under metal making my chest tighten. Gravel skittered under the tires of a pickup truck parked haphazardly near the first foundation slab, a smell of diesel and fresh paint mixing with the morning air. I could see the sunlight glint off the metal stakes marking each plot, like tiny sentinels guarding someone else's vision, someone else's power. My boots pressed into the soft earth as I walked up the hill, each step stirring a small cloud of dust that hovered in the air until it settled back on the half-dug trenches, the yellow tape fluttering in the breeze as though waving me off. Children from the nearby neighborhood peeked from behind hedges, eyes wide, mouths hidden behind hands as if they were witnessing a private war. And I felt the weight of my grandfather's legacy pressing down on me, every memory of cattle, of sunsets, of mornings walking the property line guiding my thoughts. The roar of the machinery was deafening now, metal scraping, engines whining, concrete mixers spinning, and I could hear Maggie's voice carrying across the property, telling a foreman something about community improvement and property values, every word coated with that sweet, venomous charm that made my teeth grit. Sweat stung my eyes as the Texas sun climbed higher, but I forced myself to take a deep breath, letting the heat soak through my shirt, feeling the rough texture of my hands, calloused from years of caring for this land, pressing against the pocket of my jeans as if reminding me that I belonged here, that this land belonged to me. I paused at the crest of the hill, watching the pattern of construction unfold, the foundations like rows of chess pieces, and for the first time, I allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile, knowing that every action Maggie thought was final had planted the seeds of its own undoing, every cement truck, every gravel path, every temporary fence, all of it part of a story that was only beginning to turn. And as I looked down over my family's land, the sound of the engines blending with the distant hum of a creek that had run through this property for decades, I whispered, almost to myself, they don't know what's coming. The history of this land runs deep, and every hill, every creek, every oak tree carries a memory that my family has preserved for generations. My grandfather, Samuel Carter, built the original homestead here in the early 1950s, a modest farmhouse surrounded by endless pastures where cattle grazed and wildflowers painted the landscape each spring. I remember running alongside the fence lines as a boy, hands scraped, hair dusted with hay, and hearing his voice calling me back from the far end of the property, teaching me to respect the earth, to measure twice and cut once, to understand that stewardship is not about possession but about care. Those lessons never left me. As the sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the partially cleared lots, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. My sister, Caroline, who manages the family affairs from Austin, always worries I take too much pride in this land, but she knows it is more than property, it is heritage. Walking down the familiar gravel path that winds through the back 40, I traced the impressions left by decades of boots, hooves, and tractor tires, each groove a reminder of continuity, of the life that has always thrived here despite droughts, floods, and the creeping spread of suburban developments nearby. The gentle hum of the creek under the bridge mingled with the occasional buzz of cicadas, the scent of cut grass and warm earth filling the air, creating a rhythm that has always centered me. I paused near the old dam, a small earth structure built by my grandfather, reinforced with care and precision over the years, and ran my hand along the weathered timbers, feeling the grain, the knots, the resilience embedded in every piece of wood. This was not just a functional structure, it was a symbol of foresight, a manifestation of respect for natural flow and balance. As I looked across the land, the rows of unfinished foundations rose like intruders, sharp concrete edges and metal stakes cutting against the soft rolling hills that had once been open pasture. My heart ached, but beneath the frustration, a spark of determination ignited. This is my land, these are my rules, and no bureaucratic title can erase generations of care. I walked toward the farmhouse, inhaling the mix of morning dew and the faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen where Caroline always leaves a pot brewing for early risers. The familiar creak of the door, the warm scent of aged wood, the solidity of walls built by hands that knew the meaning of patience and precision all reminded me that I carry more than memories, I carry a legacy of vigilance, a right to act when boundaries are overstepped. Sitting at the table, I opened a leather-bound folder that contained maps, old deeds, and every piece of documentation my grandfather had meticulously saved. The smell of aged paper and ink was comforting, grounding me, reminding me that preparation is as important as instinct. Each page turned revealed evidence of our claim, of the careful planning that had protected the land for decades, reinforcing my resolve that whatever steps I must take, they will be measured, deliberate, and informed. Outside, the machinery continued its relentless work, but inside, the house held a quiet sanctuary where strategy would be born, where I could trace the paths of water, the positioning of foundations, the patterns of property lines, and see the opportunities that would allow justice to flow naturally back into the hands of those who had tended this land with respect for generations. As the morning wore on, I felt a calm intensity settle over me, every sense alert, every detail accounted for, knowing that the day would demand clarity, patience, and the subtle orchestration of what had been carefully laid out by my ancestors and now by me. As I stepped back outside, the landscape had transformed into a maze of half-built foundations and scattered construction materials, each slab of concrete and steel beam standing as a stark reminder of the audacity of Maggie and her plans. My boots sank slightly into the damp soil, the morning dew still clinging to the blades of grass that had survived the heavy machinery rolling over the land. The scent of wet earth mixed with the faint chemical tang of curing concrete, creating a sharp contrast to the warm aroma of coffee that had lingered in the farmhouse. I walked along the edge of the creek, listening to the gentle burble of water as it flowed over smooth stones, a sound that had always been a source of calm and clarity for me, and I allowed myself a moment to remember the summers of my childhood spent wading through these waters, the sun beating down on my back, the laughter of my sister Caroline echoing through the trees. Maggie appeared again, this time directing a small crew of surveyors, her voice crisp, instructive, and dripping with the confidence of someone convinced that authority alone could bend reality. I noted every movement, every gesture, the way she positioned the stakes and tape measures, the way she checked the blueprints against the land, completely unaware of the depth of knowledge I carried with me, not just about the property lines but about the underlying water systems, the flow patterns, the regulatory easements that had been in place for decades. Each detail mattered, and my mind catalogued it all like an engineer tracing a complex circuit, plotting points, calculating leverage, and identifying opportunities. The sunlight caught on her sunglasses as she nodded at a foreman, giving silent approval to a minor alteration in the grading of a lot, a small action that would have consequences far beyond her understanding. I could feel the heat of the sun on my shoulders, sweat tracing the contours of my face, but I welcomed it. It sharpened my senses, made the air feel electric, heightened my awareness of every sound, the distant hum of a cement mixer, the clatter of a dropped tool, the murmur of conversation among the construction crew, each one unaware that they were walking through a carefully observed and calculated scenario. I traced the property lines in my mind, visualizing the original dam, the subtle slope of the land, the areas where water naturally pooled during rains, and the channels that had been maintained for generations to support both irrigation and wildlife. These were not just environmental features, they were assets, leverage points, the invisible threads that would allow me to restore balance without crossing legal boundaries. Walking back toward the farmhouse, I passed the edge of the first foundation, noticing how the sun reflected off the steel rebar and casting long shadows across the freshly poured concrete, and I smiled, understanding that every decision Maggie had made so far, every shortcut and adjustment, had unwittingly highlighted the vulnerabilities that I would soon address. The air was thick with anticipation, not tension, a calm that comes from preparation and clarity, and as I paused once more at the top of the hill to survey the spread of construction against the backdrop of the rolling Texas landscape, I allowed myself a slow, measured breath, knowing that observation and patience were my greatest tools, and that the land itself, guided by the principles instilled in me by my grandfather, would ultimately reveal the path to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The sound of metal scraping against gravel grew louder as a dump truck maneuvered through the construction site, scattering dust and small rocks into the air. I adjusted my wide-brimmed hat, letting the morning sun warm my back as I moved toward the cluster of partially built homes, each foundation casting sharp shadows across the soft, rolling hills that had been my family's sanctuary for decades. Every detail mattered now, from the placement of survey stakes to the slight tilt of a concrete form, and I observed it all with the keen attention of someone who had walked these acres since childhood. The smell of fresh earth mixed with the lingering scent of dew and wildflowers, grounding me, reminding me that this land had been nurtured through generations and that each stream, pond, and hill carried the care of my grandfather's hand. Maggie appeared again, clipboard in hand, walking among the newly erected stakes, her polished shoes making soft impressions on the gravel, her voice carrying over the site as she gave instructions with practiced authority, oblivious to the knowledge I held of every waterway, every historical easement, every subtle undulation of the property. I crouched near the old irrigation ditch, tracing the path of the creek with my fingers, remembering how it had been diverted and reinforced by my family to provide water for cattle and wildlife alike, a testament to foresight and patience. The machinery continued its mechanical symphony, engines whining, shovels clattering, cement mixers groaning rhythmically, a stark contrast to the natural harmony that had existed here for generations. Each sound sharpened my awareness, every vibration through the earth telling me the story of the land, of what had been and what was being imposed upon it. As I walked along the edge of the first foundation slab, I felt the texture of the gravel, the roughness of the concrete, and the warmth of the sun through the back of my shirt, anchoring me to the moment, to the responsibility that had been entrusted to me. The stakes marking the lot corners glinted in the sunlight, a series of tiny sentinels that highlighted both the intrusion and the potential leverage I could use. Birds flitted from tree to tree, their calls weaving into the hum of construction, a reminder of the ecosystem that had thrived here long before human intervention. I paused to study the slope of the land, the natural drainage patterns, the contours that would guide the water, and felt a calm determination settle over me, a quiet certainty that every choice Maggie made to advance her development was revealing opportunities that I had anticipated for decades. The distant murmur of my sister Caroline on the phone, coordinating with a local surveyor, blended with the creak of the old farmhouse, creating a rhythm that contrasted the mechanical cacophony outside. Every turn of the page in the historic maps I had carried in my leather folder, every reference to old permits and water rights, strengthened my confidence, and as I stood on the hill, surveying the spread of construction across the meadow, the faint rustle of leaves, the warmth of the sun, the distant chatter of the construction crew, all combined into a vivid, tangible understanding of the space, of the history, and of the inevitable restoration of balance that was coming. The frustration was building as I watched Maggie coordinate her crew, clipboard shaking slightly in her hand as she measured out the next foundation, oblivious to the intricate water management system that ran beneath the soil. My boots pressed firmly into the soft dirt, sending small clouds of dust into the warm Texas morning air, mingling with the faint scent of wet grass and the tang of fresh concrete. Every detail was being catalogued in my mind, from the placement of each stake to the subtle slope of the newly graded lots, knowing that these small deviations could either benefit or hinder my plan. I traced the path of the old irrigation channels with my eyes, remembering how my grandfather had dug and reinforced them by hand, teaching me that even the smallest trench could carry a great deal of responsibility and potential. The hum of machinery, the distant chatter of the crew, the metallic clank of tools being dropped, all created a symphony of human effort overlaid upon decades of careful stewardship, and I noted every nuance, every pattern, every tiny oversight. Maggie adjusted a row of temporary fencing, the metal posts gleaming in the sun, and gave a short nod to the foreman who hurried to comply, the sound of their footsteps crunching over gravel and displaced soil punctuating the rhythm of the morning. I walked along the edge of the largest foundation, feeling the vibrations of each step through the soles of my boots, the warmth of the sun pressing down on my shoulders, and allowed my mind to wander through the history embedded in every inch of this land. From the old oak tree under which my grandfather had held family meetings to the gentle slope leading down to the creek, each element carried a story, a purpose, and an opportunity that Maggie had failed to see. I pulled out my leather-bound folder, opening the pages to maps, old permits, and notes that recorded decades of careful maintenance, watching as the wind lifted a corner of a sheet, fluttering it like a signal, a reminder that observation and preparation were the key to turning this situation to my advantage. The faint murmur of Caroline on the phone reached me, coordinating with a surveyor to verify boundaries and easements, and I could feel the presence of my family's support even from a distance, reinforcing the certainty that each decision I made was informed and deliberate. I stepped closer to the creek, the water flowing steadily over smooth stones, reflecting the sunlight in tiny flashes, and I imagined the flow I could manage, the careful adjustments that would shift the balance in favor of the land, not against it. Every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call became part of the information I was gathering, a subtle symphony of the environment that Maggie had ignored, and I smiled, knowing that patience, preparation, and knowledge would allow me to reclaim control without confrontation. I let my gaze sweep across the expanse of the property, the half-built home standing in stark contrast to the rolling green pastures, and felt a quiet intensity, a calm readiness that had been cultivated over years of tending this land. Each foundation, each stake, each shadow and line now existed within a mental map of strategy, guiding my next moves, and as the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and the concrete alike, I felt the first clear stirrings of opportunity, the beginnings of the plan that would restore balance to the land my family had cherished for generations. Inside the farmhouse, I spread out every document I had meticulously collected over the years, the leather folder creaking slightly as I lifted it to the sunlight streaming through the window. Maps, water rights deeds, old surveyor notes, and construction permits from decades past lay before me, each sheet carrying the faint scent of aged paper and ink. My fingers traced the edges of a faded blueprint showing the original earth dam, the lines marking the flow of water across the property, every channel, trench, and contour painstakingly recorded. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, a soft counterpoint to the distant machinery outside, and I realized that knowledge was my most powerful ally. I recalled afternoons spent with my grandfather, Samuel Carter, watching him measure stakes and levels, explaining that understanding the lay of the land was the key to both preservation and leverage. Those lessons now guided me as I reviewed easements and federal filings that had been overlooked for years, each notation a potential turning point. I noticed a small, almost hidden annotation on an old permit indicating federal oversight due to the original dam construction, a detail that elevated my understanding from local to national jurisdiction, a line of authority Maggie and her crew had completely ignored. The creek, gently winding through the property, seemed to murmur with possibility, reminding me that water had a memory, that it followed paths dictated by careful design and history, and that the land itself could be a partner in restoring balance. As I reviewed photographs of the foundation layouts taken from a drone earlier in the week, I could see patterns emerging, small misalignments and deviations that had been overlooked but could be significant when combined with the flow of water and the positioning of the dams and irrigation channels. My mind worked through scenarios, considering how adjustments in water management could encourage natural drainage to reclaim certain areas while remaining fully compliant with all regulations. I jotted notes and sketched diagrams, connecting the dots between legal authority, historical records, and physical geography, feeling a quiet satisfaction as each connection revealed a method to achieve control without confrontation, purely through observation, timing, and knowledge. Outside, the sunlight warmed the wooden floorboards as I leaned over the table, every creak and groan of the old house serving as a reminder of continuity, of the resilience embedded in these walls and in me. Caroline's voice echoed faintly from the phone in the next room as she coordinated with a surveyor, confirming lines and easements, and I could feel her support threading through the strategy one was building. The distant hum of trucks and concrete mixers continued, but it was now background, a metronome marking the passage of time as I pieced together the plan. Every element, the stakes, the foundations, the flow of the creek, the faint incline of the hill, the exact positioning of the dam, and the legal documentation, formed a network of possibilities. As I closed the folder, the sunlight glinting off the inked lines on the papers, I felt a calm certainty, knowing that preparation had transformed into opportunity, and that the next steps, though deliberate and measured, would harness the full potential of both knowledge and environment to restore what had long been ours. The afternoon sun had climbed high into the clear Texas sky, casting long, sharp shadows from the half-built homes onto the rolling green pastures, and I moved deliberately across the land, boots crunching over the gravel and soft earth, feeling the familiar resistance underfoot that connected me to every inch of the property. My eyes scanned the layout one last time, tracing the path of the creek as it wound through the hills, noting the subtle inclines, the reinforced banks, and the small berms that had been carefully constructed to guide water. Naturally, without altering the ecology or breaking any regulations. The gentle hum of distant machinery served as a metronome, marking the hours as I methodically checked stakes and markers, ensuring that every measurement, every contour, and every element of the terrain aligned with the plan I had drawn from decades of accumulated knowledge and historical documentation. The scent of dry grass mixed with the faint chemical tang of fresh concrete, sharp and grounding, while a light breeze stirred the leaves in the old oak trees, whispering reminders of seasons past and the generations that had cultivated this land. I paused at the edge of the creek, letting my fingers trail along the cool, mossy stones, visualizing how the water would respond to subtle adjustments, how flow could be directed to reclaim sections that had been compromised, all within the boundaries of legality and environmental respect. Caroline's voice came faintly through my phone, confirming coordinates and easements with the surveyor, and I felt her presence, a quiet reassurance that our family's legacy was supported and that every step I took was deliberate and informed. The stakes marking the lots glimmered in the sunlight, each one a symbol of encroachment and an indicator of where corrective measures could restore balance. I moved back toward the farmhouse, glancing at the rows of concrete foundations and the metal rods jutting skyward, imagining how they could be harmonized with the land rather than opposed, turning intrusion into alignment. The sound of the creek burbling, combined with distant birdsong and the rhythmic hum of engines, created a layered tapestry of observation, every auditory cue recorded and assessed for subtle clues, a symphony of both natural and human activity guiding my decisions. I crouched to inspect a small channel leading from the dam, feeling the texture of the earth and the firmness of the old timbers, noting how water pooled in a low point I had predicted decades ago, a detail that would become pivotal. With each passing moment, the anticipation grew, not from haste or anxiety, but from a calm certainty, the kind that comes from preparation and intimate knowledge of one's environment. I took a slow breath, inhaling the mixed scents of earth, concrete, and sun-warmed timber, letting it fill me with a sense of readiness. Every element, stakes, foundations, water channels, vegetation, and historical markers, was now aligned in my mind into a coherent strategy. I lifted my gaze, seeing the sprawling property with all its complexity, and a sense of quiet triumph settled over me, knowing that the land itself, guided by its history and my careful planning, would support the next steps, allowing balance and rightful stewardship to flow naturally back into place without conflict, only precision, observation, and the patient orchestration of every detail I had prepared for over decades. The moment came with the quiet inevitability of dawn, the sun casting long beams across the rolling hills and the partially built foundations, illuminating every misalignment, every detail Maggie and her crew had overlooked. I walked to the edge of the dam, feeling the firmness of the old timbers beneath my fingers, recalling the precise measurements my grandfather had recorded decades ago, the channels he had carved into the hillside, and the flow patterns that had been designed to maintain balance across the entire property. The creek responded to subtle adjustments, the water lapping gently against its banks, whispering promises of movement when guided with care and patience. I opened the sluice gates with deliberate slowness, watching the small trickle swell and cascade along the channels I had carefully monitored, each drop following the path of least resistance while respecting the natural contours and the boundaries established by law. The sound of flowing water mixed with the distant hum of construction, creating a layered symphony of anticipation and inevitability, every element harmonizing with the plan that had taken decades to understand. I paced along the hill, observing how the water navigated the slopes, filling low points and subtly redirecting around the foundations without harming the integrity of any structures already partially completed, each movement precise and purposeful, a manifestation of both patience and knowledge. Maggie and the crew stopped for a moment, watching the flow, their voices carrying across the property in confusion as they noticed the subtle shifts, the way the water interacted with the land, adjusting naturally yet with authority. I allowed myself a small, measured smile, knowing that every oversight, every assumption they had made about control and dominance, was now revealing opportunities that only a deep understanding of history, topography, and engineering could provide. The sunlight glinted off the flowing water, reflecting in tiny flashes that danced across the foundations, the grass, and the remaining stakes, marking the convergence of human ambition and the natural world, demonstrating that preparation, observation, and patience could achieve outcomes far beyond brute force. I stepped back to observe the broader scene, the dam holding and guiding the water, the creek swelling in its designated path, the unfinished homes and equipment standing silently in the wake of careful orchestration, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that this moment had been crafted entirely within the rules, relying on respect for both the land and the law. Every element, water, soil, timber, concrete, and light, was working in concert, responding to the guidance of knowledge applied with precision. The morning air carried the scents of earth, grass, and fresh concrete, mingling with the warmth of the sun, grounding me in the reality that the land itself had become an active participant in restoring balance. As I watched the water follow the path I had prepared for decades, guiding it naturally, gently, yet unmistakably, I realized that the subtle, deliberate application of preparation, history, and environment had created a scene where justice unfolded quietly, inevitably, and entirely within my stewardship. The afternoon light softened across the hills, casting a warm glow on the restored pastures and the small creek that now ran smoothly through the property, guiding the water exactly as I had intended, with the dam regulating flow without disturbing any natural contours or legal boundaries. I stood atop the gentle slope, boots planted firmly on familiar soil, feeling the texture of the earth beneath me, warm and steady, as a breeze carried the scents of cut grass and sun-warmed timber. The half-built foundations and scattered construction equipment now seemed almost peaceful, inert in the face of the careful orchestration that had unfolded, a silent acknowledgement that every detail had been observed, every oversight accounted for. Maggie and her crew had left earlier, unaware of the subtle shifts, the way the water moved through its channels, correcting course naturally yet inexorably, demonstrating the precision of preparation and the quiet power of understanding the land. I walked along the edge of the property, tracing the original fence lines with my eyes, noting the alignment of stakes and the gentle roll of the hills, and felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the land itself had become an ally, its natural features guiding the restoration of balance. Birds called from the distant trees, their songs weaving into the soft hum of the creek, a reminder that life continued, resilient and patient, in tandem with the work of those who respected it. I could see Caroline moving across the farmhouse porch, her presence a calm reinforcement of our shared heritage, and I knew that every decision made today was not only legal but morally sound, reflecting the stewardship instilled in our family over generations. The sunlight glinted off the water, tracing patterns on the foundations and gravel paths, highlighting the interconnectedness of every element from the dam to the farthest corner of the pasture, a visual testament to the meticulous planning and observation that had made this outcome inevitable. I walked down to the creek, feeling the water cool and steady against my fingers, appreciating the subtle engineering of nature that had worked in concert with my adjustments, and I realized that every moment of patience, every careful observation, every measurement and historical reference had culminated in a restoration that was both practical and symbolic. The land had reclaimed its rhythm, guided by knowledge, foresight, and respect, leaving no question as to ownership or stewardship. I paused, letting the sound of flowing water and rustling leaves fill the space, the warmth of the afternoon sun bathing the scene in golden light, and felt the profound satisfaction of justice achieved quietly yet undeniably. As I looked across the property, the creek winding gently through the hills, the stakes now markers of understanding rather than intrusion, and the foundation standing silent, I knew that the legacy of careful guardianship, observation, and patience had prevailed, reaffirming that true justice is deliberate, patient, and inevitable, flowing as naturally as the water that now guided the land into equilibrium.